Time makes choices for us sometimes. 1 second, one breath, one decision, that's all it takes to alter the course of a life. For Michael Freeman, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in October, with rain threatening on the horizon and everything he'd worked for hanging in the balance. He knelt on the damp grass of a highway embankment, his navy suit pants soaking through at the knees, his polished leather shoes sinking into mud. His manicured hands, architect's hands that had once designed award-winning buildings, were pressed against the chest of a stranger, a large man in a leather vest with patches Michael didn't recognize. The man's gray beard was matted with sweat, his face ashen as he struggled for each breath. Michael's phone lit up beside him on the grass. The screen showed 17 missed calls from Westbridge Architecture Group. The clock read 3:12 p.m., 12 minutes past the interview that was supposed to save his life. "Stay with me," Michael said to the stranger, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Help is coming." The man's eyes, piercing blue against his pallid face, locked onto Michael's. His lips tinged with blue parted slightly. "Why?" The biker wheezed each word a battle. "Did you stop?" It was a simple question with an impossible answer. Why had he stopped when everything that mattered to him lay 12 minutes up the road? Why had he thrown away his last chance at salvation for a stranger in a leather vest? Michael Freeman didn't know. Not yet. But he was about to learn that sometimes the best thing that never happens to you is exactly what you need. 5 hours earlier, Michael had awakened at 6:17 a.m., just like he had every morning for the past 11 months. But this Tuesday was different. This Tuesday carried the weight of possibility, the first faint glimmer of hope after endless rejection. No alarm had sounded. When you're unemployed at 63, your body doesn't need mechanical reminders of time's passage. It wakes you anyway, an internal clock, still punctual after 4 decades of professional discipline. Michael lay still for a moment, listening to Nancy's soft breathing beside him. His wife of 38 years still slept, her silver hair spread across the pillow, her face relaxed in ways it never was during waking hours anymore. The lines around her eyes had deepened this past year, lines earned from extra shifts at Carson's Diner on the other side of town, serving coffee to strangers until midnight, so they could keep making payments on a house they were losing anyway. He rose quietly, his joints protesting with the familiar ache of age. The bathroom mirror offered no comfort, just the reflection of a man who looked older than his years. Not distinguished older or experienced older, just tired older. The kind of tired that settles into the bones and reshapes the contours of a face. Michael leaned closer to the mirror, rehearsing a smile he hadn't needed in months. The confident smile. The "I have 40 years of experience" smile. The "I'm exactly who you want on your team" smile. It felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Downstairs, the kitchen was awash in that particular golden morning light that used to make him happy. Now it just illuminated the stack of envelopes on the counterbills, mostly with the red "Final Notice" stamps glaring up at him. He methodically opened his laptop, the same one he'd used for 20 years of successful projects, and logged into his bank account. $473.06. Nancy's paycheck from the diner would come Friday. That would buy them another week, maybe 2, if they were careful. If nothing broke, if no one got sick, if the universe granted just a small reprieve. The coffee maker gurgled behind him as he heard Nancy's footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, her waitress uniform already on her eyes, finding his immediately searching for any sign of how he was feeling on this pivotal day. "Morning," she said, her voice soft with sleep, but edged with that worry that had become her constant companion. "Morning, honey." Michael poured her coffee black with 1 sugar, just as she'd taken it since 1986, when they'd met at the groundbreaking of his first major project, the Riverside Community Center, the one that had won him the State Award for Innovative Public Spaces. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table that had witnessed decades of their lives, celebrations of promotions, their daughter's college acceptance letter, Sunday mornings solving crossword puzzles together. Now they sat in silence, both pretending not to notice the stack of rejection letters in the desk drawer. 27 of them. Michael had counted last night when sleep wouldn't come. Then his phone rang. The sound sliced through the kitchen stillness like lightning. Michael looked at the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. But no number. Nancy's eyes locked onto his face, her coffee cup suspended midway to her lips. "Mr. Freeman." The voice was professional, female efficient. This is Patricia Moreno from Westbridge Architecture Group. We'd like to invite you for a final interview today at 3 o'clock. I know it's short notice, but yes, the word came out too fast, too eager. Michael cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim some professional dignity. Yes, I can certainly make that work. When he hung up, Nancy was already crying. Happy tears this time, the first happy tears in months. She stood and wrapped her arms around him, and Michael held her tight, feeling something almost forgotten stirring in his chest. Hope. He had no idea that this interview, the one he'd never make it to, would be the best thing that never happened to him. The Navy suit hung on the bedroom door like a uniform for battle. Barely worn since the layoff, it had been carefully preserved for precisely this kind of moment. Michael dressed with methodical precision. Starched white shirt, burgundy tie, the power tie Nancy called it, polished black leather shoes that reflected the bedroom light. His portfolio lay open on the bed, 40 years of architectural achievement distilled into 15 perfect examples. The Riverside Community Center that had launched his career. The Westview office complex that had been featured in Architectural Digest. The Central Public Library with its innovative use of natural light that had earned him handshakes from the mayor and city council. Accomplishments that meant nothing to the 20-something HR representatives who scanned his resume for 10 seconds before sending form rejection emails. Too old, too expensive, too set in his ways. They never said these things outright. Discrimination based on age was illegal after all, but Michael could read between the lines. Not the right fit for our company culture. Looking for someone who can grow with us long term. Seeking candidates with fresh perspectives. Code words. All of them code for "you're 63 and we want 30. Michael stood before the mirror, straightening his tie with hands that had designed buildings that would stand for generations after he was gone. My greatest strength is my ability to see a project through from concept to completion, he rehearsed aloud. Why did I leave my last position, company restructuring, unfortunately? Never say fired, never say too old, never say desperate. Nancy appeared in the doorway, watching him with eyes that held more faith in him than he had in himself. You look perfect, she said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his shoulder. They'd be fools not to hire you. From your lips to God's ears, Michael replied the old phrase his father had used a lifetime ago. His father, Samuel Freeman, a carpenter who'd never earned more than $30,000 a year, but who'd taught Michael everything about integrity and hard work, who'd placed a boy's hands on the smooth grain of oak and shown him how to read the story in the wood, who'd given him the antique pocket watch he now slipped into his vest pocket, a ritual before every important meeting for 40 years. Remember, son, his father had said on the day he'd given him that watch, a man is defined by what he does when nobody's looking. Michael wondered what his father would think of him now, unemployed at 63 on the verge of losing the house, watching Nancy work herself to exhaustion to keep them afloat. Would he be disappointed? Or would he understand that the world had changed, that experience and craftsmanship had been devalued in an age that worshipped youth and innovation above all else? You'll get this job, Nancy said, breaking into his thoughts. I can feel it. Michael kissed her goodbye at the door, watched her climb into her aging Toyota for yet another double shift at the diner, and tried to believe her. He had 45 minutes to get across town. The GPS said 32 minutes. He'd be early, good professional. He took one last look at their house in the rearview mirror. The colonial they'd bought in 1984, where they'd raised their daughter, hosted Christmas dinners, and planted the maple tree that now towered over the front yard. The house they might lose if this didn't work out. Michael Freeman was going to save his life today. At least that's what he thought. The Honda Civic had seen better days. 214,000 miles on the odometer. A crack in the windshield he kept meaning to fix. Air conditioning that worked only when it felt like it. But it ran, and right now that was all that mattered. Michael merged onto Highway 41, his hands at 10 and 2, like his father had taught him 50 years ago. Professional, controlled. Everything about today needed to be controlled. The GPS glowed on the dashboard. 15 minutes to destination. He glanced at the clock. 2:45 p.m. He'd arrive at exactly 3 Harborough. Perfect timing. Not too early, not rushing in late and sweaty. Just right. Vivaldi's Four Seasons played softly through the aging speakers. Spring, something light and hopeful. The violins danced through the car like everything was going to be fine, like the universe wasn't balanced on a knife's edge, waiting to tip one way or the other. Michael's mind raced ahead to the interview room. He could see it clearly, the conference table, the panel of three, maybe four people, his portfolio spread out before them. They'd flip through his work, nod appreciatively at the awards, the publications, the testimonials from satisfied clients. They'd see what he could do. They'd see he still had it. This job could save everything. The house payment 3 months behind, Nancy's dignity, she shouldn't have to work double shifts at 61 coming home with her feet swollen and her back aching. His own sense of worth, the feeling that he still mattered, that he still had something to offer the world beyond desperation and an outdated resume. The traffic was unusually light for a Tuesday afternoon. Clear lanes ahead. The universe was cooperating. Finally. 13 minutes now. He was going to make it with time to spare. Maybe even sit in the parking lot for a few minutes, collect himself, run through his talking points one more time. I bring 4 decades of experience and a passion for sustainable urban design. Good, confident, exactly what they wanted to hear. Michael allowed himself a small smile, his first real smile in months. The highway stretched out before him, sun-dappled and wide open. Trees lined both sides, their leaves turning gold and orange in the October light. Beautiful. He'd forgotten to notice beautiful things. When you're drowning, you don't look at the scenery. But today felt different. Today felt like the day everything turned around. The clock read 2:47 p.m. 13 minutes to go. The GPS recalculated. 12 minutes now. He was actually going to be early. Then he saw the skid marks. They appeared suddenly on the shoulder of the highway. Fresh black rubber burned into the asphalt in long, desperate arcs. The kind of marks that tell a story you don't want to read. Michael's foot eased off the gas pedal. Instinct. Something was wrong. The music continued, violins soaring, spring pretending everything was fine. And that's when he saw it. The motorcycle was on its side in the drainage ditch 20 feet off the road. Chrome and black metal twisted at an angle motorcycles aren't supposed to bend. Smoke rising from the engine in thin gray wisps. And beside it, halfway between the bike and the road, a man. Leather vest, gray beard. One arm outstretched toward the highway as if he'd been trying to crawl for help before his strength gave out. Not moving. Michael's heart stopped. His foot hit the brake. The Honda slowed. The violins played on oblivious. Other cars whooshed past him. People going somewhere important. People with places to be. People who didn't see or didn't care or had already made the calculation that this wasn't their problem. The clock on the dashboard read 2:48 p.m. 12 minutes. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The interview flashed through his mind. The panel waiting. The position being offered to someone else if he didn't show. Nancy's face when he came home unemployed again. The house. Everything. The man in the ditch still wasn't moving. Michael could see the hospital from here about half a mile up the road. Surely someone from there would come. Or another driver. Someone else. Someone who didn't have everything riding on being somewhere in 12 minutes. But even as he thought it, Michael knew the truth. The traffic was light. No other cars were stopping. And the man was alone. 10 minutes now. Michael's hands began to turn the wheel. Not toward the interview, but toward the shoulder of the road. Toward the man who might be dying while violins played spring and the clock ticked down his last chance at salvation. And that's when he saw him clearly. Saw his chest rising and falling. Shallow breaths. Saw his hand clutching at his vest. Saw his face twisted in pain. Saw that he was alive. But maybe not for long. Michael's Honda came to a stop on the shoulder gravel, crunching under the tires. The engine idled. The violin still played. And for 3 seconds, 3 eternal seconds, Michael sat frozen behind the wheel, his hand still gripping it, like maybe if he held on tight enough, he could hold on to the life he was about to lose. Then he opened the door. The October air hit him first. Cool, clean. The smell of burning oil from the wrecked motorcycle mixing with the scent of fallen leaves. Michael's dress shoes hit the gravel, and he was moving half-running down the slope toward the man in the ditch. Up close, it was worse than he'd thought. The man was big 60-something, maybe older. His face was gray, the kind of gray that meant his heart wasn't pumping blood the way it should. The leather vest he wore was covered in patches, symbols Michael didn't understand. Skulls, wings, words embroidered in Gothic script. The motorcycle beside him was massive, probably 800 pounds of chrome and steel, now a smoking ruin in the drainage ditch. But it was the man's hand that terrified Michael most. It was clutched to his chest, fingers curled like claws, and his breathing came in short, desperate gasps. Each breath looked like it cost him everything. "Sir," Michael dropped to his knees beside him, his pressed suit pants hitting the wet grass. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes opened, blue, sharp. Even through the pain, there was something fierce in those eyes. "Chest," the man wheezed. "Can't breathe." Michael's hands fumbled for his phone. His mind raced. Heart attack. This was a heart attack. He'd seen his own father go through one 15 years ago. He knew what this looked like. 911. His fingers shook as he dialed. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's a motorcycle accident. He's having a heart attack. Highway 41 mile marker 63. He needs an ambulance. Now." "Sir, stay calm. Is he conscious?" "Yes, but barely. He's clutching his chest. Can't breathe properly." "Ambulance is dispatched. Stay on the line. Estimated arrival 30 to 40 minutes. 30 to 40 minutes. Michael looked at his watch. 2:51 p.m. The interview was at 3:00 p.m. The office was 12 minutes away. If he left now, right now, he could still make it. Late, but he could call from the road, explain there was an emergency, ask them to wait. The ambulance was coming. This man would be okay. Someone else could wait with him. Michael looked back at the highway. Empty. Not a single car in sight. The traffic that had been steady just minutes ago had evaporated like it had never existed. He looked down at the man. His lips were turning blue. "Is someone there?" the dispatcher asked in his ear. "Sir, is someone staying with the victim?" Michael opened his mouth. The words should have been easy. "Yes, I'm here. I'll stay." But they stuck in his throat because his mind was screaming something else. The house, Nancy, the bills. The last 11 months of rejection and failure, and feeling like the world had forgotten he existed. This was his one chance, his last chance. Nancy's voice echoed in his memory from a conversation months ago when he'd given money to a homeless man outside the grocery store, money they couldn't spare. She'd been gentle but firm. "Michael, we can't save everyone. We have to take care of ourselves first." She'd been right then, and she'd be right now, but this man was dying. Michael looked at his phone screen. He had Patricia Moreno's number pulled up. One call, one explanation. Maybe they'd wait. Maybe they'd understand. Or maybe they'd give the job to someone who actually showed up. The man's breathing changed. Shallower. Faster. Worse. "I'm here," Michael said into the phone, and the words felt like they were sealing something. "I'm staying with him." "Good. Keep him calm. Keep him still. Help is on the way." Michael ended the call and knelt closer to the man. Hey, you're going to be okay. Ambulance is coming. Just hang on." The man's eyes focused on him, really looked at him for the first time, took in the navy suit, the polished shoes now covered in mud, the expensive leather portfolio that Michael had dropped somewhere in the grass. "You're," the man wheezed each word a battle, "missing something important, aren't you?" Michael felt his throat tighten. He nodded, couldn't speak. The man's hand shot out with surprising strength and grabbed Michael's wrist. His grip was weak but insistent. His blue eyes locked onto Michael's, and in that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the weight of what this cost. "Then why?" the man gasped, his chest heaving. "Why did you stop?" Michael opened his mouth, closed it. The question hung in the air between them like smoke from the wrecked motorcycle. "Why did you stop when everything you needed was 12 minutes away? When this stranger was nothing to you? When you had every reason to keep driving? Why did you stop?" "I don't know," Michael whispered. And it was the truth. He didn't know, couldn't explain it, couldn't justify it to Nancy or to himself or to the universe that seemed determined to take everything from him. He'd stopped because he couldn't not stop. The man's grip on his wrist loosened slightly, but his eyes never left Michael's face. And in those eyes, Michael saw something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude maybe, or respect, or something deeper that didn't have a word. "What's your name?" Michael asked quietly. "Grizzly," the man gasped. "They call me Grizzly." Michael didn't know it then, but the man he was helping had brothers. A lot of them. And Grizzly was about to make sure they knew exactly who Michael Freeman was, what he'd sacrificed, what he'd given up to sit in the mud beside a stranger and hold his hand while an ambulance took 38 minutes to arrive and a career opportunity died 12 minutes up the road. But that question, that single question, wheezed out between failing breaths, would echo in Michael's mind for weeks to come. Why did you stop? The ambulance arrived 38 minutes after Michael made the call. 38 minutes of kneeling in wet grass, holding a stranger's hand, watching his lips stay blue and his breathing stay shallow, and wondering if he was watching a man die. But Grizzly held on. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency. Questions fired rapidly. How long has he been like this? Did he lose consciousness? Any previous cardiac history? Michael answered what he could, which wasn't much. He knew nothing about this man except his name and the fact that he'd been dying alone on a Tuesday afternoon. They loaded Grizzly onto the stretcher oxygen mask over his face IV line, already running into his arm. As they lifted him toward the ambulance, Grizzly's hand reached out one more time, found Michael's sleeve, held it for just a second. His eyes locked onto Michael's face with an intensity that made something in Michael's chest tighten. Then he was gone. The ambulance doors closed. The sirens wailed to life, and Michael stood alone on the side of Highway 41, covered in mud and grass stains, watching the red lights disappear around the bend. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked down at himself. His navy suit was ruined. His polished shoes were caked in mud. His hands were shaking. And somewhere 12 minutes away, his future had already been decided without him. He climbed back up the slope to his Honda. Each step felt heavier than the last. The driver's door was still open, the car still running, the classical station still playing like nothing had happened. Like the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Michael collapsed into the driver's seat and finally looked at his phone. 17 missed calls. The number sat there on his screen like an accusation. 17 times someone had tried to reach him. 17 times he'd been too busy saving a stranger's life to answer. His fingers moved mechanically through the voicemails. The first few were from Patricia Moreno. Professional, concerned. Mr. Freeman, we're ready for you whenever you arrive. Then confusion. Mr. Freeman, is everything all right? Then irritation. Mr. Freeman, we do have other candidates waiting. The last voicemail was time-stamped 3:23 p.m. Michael's hand trembled as he pressed play. Mr. Freeman, this is Patricia Moreno from Westbridge Architecture Group. Her voice was cold now, formal, the warmth from this morning completely gone. We waited as long as we could, but we've made the decision to move forward with another candidate. We understand that circumstances arise, but professional courtesy would have been a phone call. We wish you the best in your job search. The message ended. Michael sat in the silence that followed. The phone felt heavy in his hand. 17 missed calls, one ruined suit, one saved life, one lost job. The math didn't add up. Couldn't add up. How do you measure a man's heartbeat against a mortgage payment? How do you weigh keeping someone alive against keeping your own life from falling apart? He couldn't, so he just sat there, engine running, staring at nothing. The drive home happened in a fog. Michael didn't remember merging back onto the highway. Didn't remember the turns or the stoplights or the familiar streets of his neighborhood. He just drove his mind blank, his chest hollow, his hands gripping the wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the world. When he pulled into his driveway, the sun was starting to set. Golden light slanted across the lawn, making everything look peaceful. Normal. Like this was just another Tuesday evening and not the day Michael Freeman threw away his last chance at salvation. The front door opened before he could even turn off the engine. Nancy stood in the doorway, still wearing her robe from this morning. She must have been watching for him. Waiting. Her face was bright with hope, with anticipation, with all the dreams they'd been holding on to for 11 desperate months. How did it go? She called out, already smiling. Michael got out of the car slowly, his ruined suit, his mud-caked shoes, his empty hands where a job offer should have been. Nancy's smile faltered, then faded, then disappeared completely. She knew just from looking at him. She knew. Michael walked up the driveway, each step heavier than climbing a mountain. When he reached the doorway, Nancy's hand came up to her mouth. Her eyes were already filling with tears. Michael. Her voice was small, frightened. What happened? He opened his mouth to tell her about the motorcycle, about Grizzly, about the choice he'd made on the side of the highway, about watching their last chance at keeping the house drive away in an ambulance with a stranger inside. But the words wouldn't come. How do you tell your wife that you chose a stranger over your family? How do you explain that when everything was on the line, you stopped anyway? How do you justify throwing away their future for a man whose last name you didn't even know? I didn't make it, he whispered. Nancy's face crumpled. She pulled him inside, wrapped her arms around him, and they stood in the doorway as the sunset painted their world in shades of gold and shadow. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? 3 days later, Michael still hadn't told her the whole truth. 3 days became a week. A week became two, and still the phone didn't ring. Michael sat at his desk in the spare bedroom they called an office, staring at job listings that all started to look the same. Senior architect, 10+ years experience required. Must be proficient in AutoCAD, Revit, SketchUp. He was proficient in all of them. More than proficient. He'd been using these programs since before half these hiring managers were born. But 63 years old might as well have been 100 in this market. He clicked, applied, uploaded his resume for the 47th time that month, wrote another cover letter explaining his passion for sustainable design and his commitment to excellence. Hit submit, watched the confirmation page load, felt nothing. Nancy's footsteps on the stairs pulled him from the screen. She appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, and Michael could see the question in her eyes before she even asked it. The same question she'd been asking every day since that Tuesday. The question that was slowly eating away at both of them. Any responses? Michael shook his head. She set his coffee down gently, and that small act of tenderness made something crack inside him. He'd been holding it in for days, the truth, the real reason he'd missed that interview. And suddenly, sitting there in their tiny office with bills piled high and hope running low, he couldn't hold it anymore. There was a man, Michael said quietly, on the highway, the day of the interview. Nancy sat down slowly in the chair across from him. What kind of man? A biker, motorcycle accident. He was having a heart attack in a ditch. Michael's voice grew steadier as he continued. I stopped, called 911, stayed with him until the ambulance came. He looked up, meeting Nancy's eyes directly. I couldn't just leave him there, Nancy. He was dying. Nancy's hand came up to her forehead. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but strained. Michael, I understand, I do. But we can't pay the mortgage on kindness. The words hit him like a physical blow because they were true. Undeniably, impossibly true. Kindness didn't pay bills. Compassion didn't keep the lights on. Doing the right thing didn't stop foreclosure notices from arriving in the mail. And arrive they did, 60 days. The notice came on a Thursday morning, official and cold printed on paper that felt heavier than it should. Michael held it in his hands and felt the walls of 40 years of building things, buildings a career, a life start to collapse around him. He applied to more jobs. Not architect positions anymore. He couldn't afford to be picky. Retail management, office administration, anything that paid. But every application disappeared into a void of automated responses and polite rejections. Overqualified, not the right fit, moving forward with other candidates. 2 weeks after the interview that never was, Michael found himself driving. No destination, just driving to escape the walls of his house that seemed to be closing in. And without meaning to, he ended up on Highway 41. Mile marker 63, he pulled onto the shoulder, his tires crunching on the same gravel where he'd parked that Tuesday afternoon. The ditch was empty now. The motorcycle was gone. The skid marks had faded, but there were flowers. Someone had placed a small bouquet against the guardrail, wildflowers already wilting in the October sun. A handwritten note tied to them with string, but too far away for Michael to read. He got out of the car and walked down the slope. The flowers were fresh, maybe a day old. Someone had been here recently, someone who cared about the man in the leather vest. The man Michael had knelt beside and held the hand of while his own future bled out. Grizzly, that's what he'd said his name was. Michael stood there in the grass looking at those flowers and wondered if Grizzly had survived. Wondered if his choice to stop had even mattered. What if the man had died anyway? What if Michael had thrown away everything for nothing? He pulled out his phone and tried to search Grizzly motorcycle accident, Highway 41. But nothing came up. No news articles, no obituaries, no answers, just the digital equivalent of silence. He tried calling the local hospital. I'm looking for a patient who was brought in 2 weeks ago. Heart attack. His name was Grizzly. Sir, I can't give out patient information. I'm the one who called at 911. I just want to know if he's okay. I'm sorry, sir. Privacy regulations. I can't help you. Dead end after dead end. It was like Grizzly had vanished. Like that whole afternoon had been a fever dream, except for the ruined suit in Michael's closet and the rejection email still sitting in his inbox and the foreclosure notice on his desk. Michael would learn the man's full name eventually. When he did, it would explain everything: the flowers, the silence, the strange feeling that he was being watched by eyes he couldn't see. But not yet. Not while Michael sat in his car on the shoulder of Highway 41, surrounded by the weight of a choice he couldn't undo and consequences he couldn't escape. He looked at those mysterious patches he remembered on Grizzly's vest, the symbols he hadn't understood, the words in Gothic script. They'd meant something, something important, something that explained why flowers appeared on an empty stretch of highway for a man who'd left no trace. But Michael didn't know what. Not yet. The truth was, Michael didn't know anymore, sitting there alone, watching the sun sink lower, feeling the weight of 60 days until foreclosure. He honestly didn't know if stopping had been the right choice or the biggest mistake of his life. All he knew was that it was done. The choice was made, and now he had to live with it. For weeks after that Tuesday afternoon on Highway 41, Michael had almost convinced himself it had all been for nothing. The foreclosure notice had been updated. 30 days now. Nancy had picked up a third shift at the diner. Michael had interviewed at a hardware store for a position stocking shelves at $14 an hour. The manager had looked at his resume and said he'd call. He hadn't called. The calendar on the kitchen wall stared at Michael like an accusation. Each X marked through another day felt like a countdown to oblivion. How had it come to this? 4 decades of building structures that would outlast him by centuries, reduced to begging for minimum wage jobs that didn't even want him. The interview at Mason's auto parts store had been the final humiliation. The manager, Kyle, couldn't have been more than 30, sleeve tattoos, energy drink on his desk. That particular brand of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important yet. With all due respect, Mr. Freeman, Kyle had said, scanning the resume with a furrowed brow, why are you applying here? You've designed multi-million-dollar buildings. We're talking about helping people find oil filters. Michael had his answer prepared, the one he'd been using for weeks now. I'm looking for a change of pace, something less stressful, more hands-on. Kyle wasn't buying it. Nobody was. The truth screamed from every line of Michael's resume, from the slump of his shoulders, from the desperation in his eyes. Nobody wanted to hire the drowning man. You're overqualified, Kyle said, leaning back in his chair. Way overqualified. You'd be bored in a week and quit. I can't hire someone who's going to leave the second something better comes along. Something better. Michael almost laughed at that. There was nothing better. There was nothing at all. Thank you for your time, Michael said, and walked out to his Honda in the parking lot. He didn't drive home right away, just sat there, engine off, watching people come and go from the store. Young people. People with their whole lives ahead of them. People who didn't know what it felt like to have 40 years of expertise and nobody who wanted it. When he finally turned the key in the ignition, the radio came on automatically. A news segment about the booming economy, about record low unemployment, about opportunities everywhere. For everyone but him. Saturday morning, 26 days until foreclosure. Michael sat at the kitchen table circling job listings in the newspaper, the actual physical newspaper, because he'd reached the point of desperation where he was checking every possible source. The grocery store manager never called back after his interview. Neither did the warehouse supervisor or the office supply company or the call center that advertised they were hiring anyone with basic computer skills. Apparently, 63 years old with basic computer skills wasn't what they meant. Age discrimination was illegal. Of course, everyone knew that, but nobody said it out loud. They just said things like, not the right fit, and looking for someone with more energy, and hoping to grow someone long-term in this role. Code words that all meant the same thing: you're too old. The marriage was suffering. Not because Nancy blamed him. She never said a word about the interview he'd missed or the choice he'd made. But the weight of it lived between them anyway. In the silence over dinner, in the way she left for her shifts at the diner before dawn and came home after dark, her feet swollen and her face exhausted. In the way Michael couldn't meet her eyes anymore because he felt like he'd failed her in every way a husband could fail. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Michael wasn't expecting anyone. They didn't get visitors anymore. Their friends had slowly drifted away over the months of unemployment, the way friends do when your misery makes them uncomfortable. The only people who rang their doorbell were delivery drivers and occasionally kids selling fundraiser candy bars. He opened the door and found himself staring at two of the largest men he'd ever seen. Both tall, both broad-shouldered, both wearing leather vests over plain t-shirts despite the October chill. The vests were covered in patches, and Michael recognized those patches now because he'd spent hours online trying to identify them, trying to find some trace of the man he'd helped. Hell's Angels. The skull and wings insignia was unmistakable. Death Head, they called it. Michael had read about it in his desperate late-night searches, one of the most recognized symbols in motorcycle culture. A symbol that carried weight. History. Brotherhood. His hand tightened on the doorframe. The older of the two men, maybe 50, with a gray beard and kind eyes that didn't match the intimidating leather, spoke first. His voice was surprisingly gentle. "Are you Michael Freeman?" Michael's mouth went dry. He nodded. "The man who helped Grizzly on Highway 41 about 4 weeks back." Grizzly. That name again. The only name Michael had been given while kneeling in wet grass watching a stranger struggle to breathe. "Yes," Michael managed. "Is he... did he... He's alive." The second man spoke now, younger, maybe 35, with tattoos crawling up his neck. But he was smiling. "Wanted us to thank you personally." Something loosened in Michael's chest that had been tight for 4 weeks. Alive. Grizzly was alive. The choice had mattered. The man had survived. "I'm just glad he's okay," Michael said, and meant it with everything in him. The older man reached into his vest pocket and pulled out something. Plain white envelope unsealed. He handed it to Michael with both hands like it was something important. "This is from the brothers, from all of us. Grizzly told us what you did, what you gave up to stay with him." Michael opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a simple card with a motorcycle printed on the front. The words "Grizzly's Recovery Fund" were handwritten across the top. And inside the card, folded neatly, were 5 $100 bills. $500. Michael stared at the money. It was more than he'd seen in cash in months, more than they had in their bank account right now. It could pay the electric bill, buy groceries for 3 weeks, give them just a little more time. But it wasn't enough to stop foreclosure, wasn't enough to save the house, wasn't enough to undo the consequences of that choice on the highway. "I can't accept this," Michael said, even though every practical bone in his body screamed that he was being an idiot. "I didn't help him for money. He needed help." "We know." The older man's voice was firm. "That's exactly why you're getting it. Grizzly said you were on your way somewhere important. Said you had the look of a man with everything on the line." Michael felt his throat tighten. He remembered Grizzly's question. "Why did you stop?" "He wants to meet you," the younger man added. "When he's stronger, when he's out of recovery, he wanted us to tell you that." He paused, his expression serious. "Said he owes you his life, and that means something to us. To all of us." The older man extended his hand. Michael shook it. The grip was firm, calloused, real. "Brothers take care of brothers," the man said. "And you're one of us now, whether you wear the vest or not." Then they were gone, walking down the driveway to 2 massive motorcycles parked at the curb. Chrome gleaming in the morning sun, engines roaring to life with a sound that made windows rattle. And Michael stood in his doorway, holding an envelope with $500 and a promise that felt bigger than the money, but smaller than his problems. Nancy appeared beside him, dish towel in her hands. She'd been watching from the kitchen. "What was that about?" Her voice was careful, confused. Michael looked down at the card in his hands, at the money that was kind but not enough, at the words "Grizzly's Recovery Fund" written in someone's careful handwriting. "The man I helped," Michael said slowly, "he's alive, and he sent friends." Friends. Nancy looked at the motorcycles disappearing down their quiet suburban street, sounding like thunder rolling away. "Those were Hell's Angels, Michael." "I know." She looked at the envelope at the money visible inside. Her face went through that same series of emotions it always did these days. Hope, caution, fear. Is that $500? Michael nodded. Nancy was quiet for a long moment. Then she took the card from his hands and read it. Read it again. Looked up at Michael with eyes that were trying very hard not to cry. It's not enough, she whispered. Is it? Michael pulled her close. No, it's not enough. But Michael couldn't know that the $500 was kind, that it was genuine, that it came from men who believed in taking care of their own. But it wasn't the gift, not even close. The real gift was being built somewhere Michael couldn't see, in phone calls between chapters, in favors being called in a brotherhood mobilizing for a man who'd proven he had the one thing they valued most: honor. That 500 would pay their electric bill, would buy them 2 more weeks, would let Nancy cut back to 2 shifts instead of 3 for a little while. But the real gift was still coming. Michael just didn't know it yet. Robert Grizzly Thompson had been with the Hells Angels for 33 years. At 65, he was one of the oldest active members in the chapter, a status that earned him both respect and a certain latitude. He'd earned the road name Grizzly during a bar fight in '89 when he'd taken down 3 men despite having a broken arm. The name stuck because it fit big, powerful, occasionally dangerous, if provoked, but mostly content to be left alone. His brothers visited him daily in the hospital after the heart attack. They brought food that wasn't hospital food. They brought news from the road. They brought the familiar scent of leather and motor oil that reminded Grizzly of freedom. And they brought questions about the man in the suit who'd stopped on Highway 41. What do we know about him? Grizzly asked from his hospital bed 3 days after the heart attack. He was stable enough to make calls now, though the doctors had told him this was his 3rd and quite possibly last warning. One more and there wouldn't be anyone to call 911 in time. Wolf, his oldest friend in the chapter, sat beside him. Michael Freeman, 63, architect, unemployed for almost a year, was on his way to a job interview when he found you. Missed it, obviously. Grizzly nodded slowly. Find out more. Find out what he lost. Find out what he needs. Wolf didn't question why. In 30 years of friendship, he'd learned to trust Grizzly's instincts about people. The next day, Wolf returned with more information. House in foreclosure, 30 days left, wife working 3 shifts at some diner. Guys applied to every job in the area, but nobody's hiring architects his age. Grizzly's eyes narrowed. The interview he missed. What was that for? Senior architect position at Westbridge Architecture Group. 6-figure salary. Last chance kind of thing. Grizzly was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for his cell phone. Who are you calling? Wolf asked. Chapter presidents, Grizzly said simply. All of them within 3 states. Wolf raised an eyebrow. All of them, what for? Grizzly's weathered face softened for a moment. The man was on his way to a job that would have saved his house, saved his life, and he stopped for me. Threw it all away for a stranger in a ditch. He paused, his voice rough with emotion. I was a minute from death, Wolf. Doctor said if he hadn't stopped, hadn't stayed, I wouldn't have made it, so I'm calling in every favor I've ever earned. Wolf's eyes widened as he realized what Grizzly was planning. You're going to build him something. Grizzly smiled. No, brother, we're going to build him something. The abandoned warehouse on the east side of town had been empty for 2 years. Once a distribution center for a company that had moved operations overseas, it now sat surrounded by chain-link fence and neglect. But it had potential high ceilings, good natural light, a central location not far from downtown. More importantly, it was available cheap. And one of the brothers, Diesel, happened to be in commercial real estate. Owner owes me a favor, Diesel explained at the chapter meeting 3 weeks after Grizzly's heart attack. I got his kid out of a jam last year. He'll give us the first 6 months at half rent, no deposit. Around the table sat 15 men from various walks of life. To the outside world, they were Hell's Angels, dangerous, lawless, to be feared and avoided. But under the leather and tattoos and fierce expressions were electricians, contractors, teachers, mechanics, small business owners, men with skills, men with resources, men with a code. Grizzly, still weak but insistent on attending, nodded his approval. That's the location sorted. Now the build-out. Hammer, what do we need? Hammer, so named because he could fix almost anything, consulted a notepad. For a proper architecture office, drafting tables, computers with specialized software, plotting equipment for large format printing, conference table, presentation area. He looked up. It's not cheap, boss. I know, Grizzly said. That's why we're all here. Each of us contributes what we can. Money, labor, equipment, connections. This is for a man who saved my life. A man with honor. Honor. The word resonated around the table. In their world, honor wasn't just a concept. It was the currency that mattered more than money. It was the thing that separated them from the criminals the world assumed they were. My cousin works for a tech company that's upgrading, said Wrench, the youngest member present. I can probably get 3 or 4 high-end workstations. They just throw them away otherwise. I've got drafting tables and storage, another offered. From when my brother-in-law's architecture firm downsized. 3 of them good quality. My construction company can handle the build-out, said Hammer. Electrical painting fixtures. We'll do it nights and weekends. One by one they committed. Equipment, labor, materials, cash. Each giving what they could afford from their own lives to help a stranger who'd saved their brother. What about clients? Asked Wolf, always the practical one. Having an office is great, but the man needs work. Grizzly smiled. Already on it. Called in a favor with Rodriguez Construction. They need plans for that new apartment complex downtown. First contract is worth $50,000. Baker's Hardware is expanding, that's another $20,000. And Riverside Community College needs renovations to their library. That's a 6-month project right there. The men around the table nodded, impressed, but not surprised. Grizzly had always been the one with the most connections, the most respect outside the club. His word carried weight far beyond their brotherhood. We'll give him a real chance, Grizzly continued. Not charity, not a handout. An opportunity to rebuild, to stand on his own 2 feet, to be the man he was before the world tried to throw him away. The meeting continued late into the night, details hammered out, responsibilities, assigned timelines established. Operation Architect, they called it, a mission of honor. None of them spoke of the deeper truth that moved them all to action. That in Michael Freeman, a 63-year-old man discarded by a society obsessed with youth and novelty, they saw reflections of themselves. Men whose value was judged not by character or skill or experience, but by appearance and age and assumptions. They were building more than an office for Michael Freeman. They were building a statement about worth, about dignity, about the things that really matter in a world that had forgotten how to see. 20 days until foreclosure. Michael sat in the spare bedroom that served as his office, methodically filling out yet another application for a job he wouldn't get. This one was for night manager at a 24-hour convenience store. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was something. Anything. The $500 from Grizzly's fund had paid the electric bill, had bought groceries, had given them a small buffer, but nothing more. The foreclosure clock kept ticking. The rejection emails kept coming. The phone still didn't ring. Michael looked at the photographs on his desk. Nancy on their wedding day 38 years ago, her smile bright enough to light the world. Their daughter Melissa now living in Seattle with her husband and children. They'd offered to help, of course, but Michael had refused. They had their own mortgage, their own children's college funds to worry about. He wouldn't burden them with his failure. Beside these family photos sat his professional awards. The American Institute of Architects recognition for the Riverside Community Center. The Sustainable Design Award for the Solar Integrated Office Complex in Phoenix. Testaments to a career that had once meant something. That had once been enough. Michael picked up one of the awards, a small crystal sculpture shaped like a modern building. He'd been so proud the night he received it. Dinner at the Marriott downtown, Nancy in her best dress, applause as he approached the stage. Respect. Now it was just a paperweight, a relic from a life that no longer existed. The sound of a car door slamming jolted him from his memories. Nancy wasn't due home from her shift for hours. He looked out the window and saw her Toyota in the driveway. Something was wrong. Michael hurried downstairs to find Nancy leaning against the wall in the entryway, her face pale, her breathing labored. Her waitress uniform was stained with what looked like coffee. Nancy, alarm shot through him as he reached her. What happened? Are you okay? She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just got a little dizzy at work. Manager sent me home. She pushed herself away from the wall, swayed slightly. I'm fine, just need to sit down for a minute. Michael helped her to the couch, his heart pounding. She wasn't fine. He could see it in the dark circles under her eyes, in the way her hands trembled slightly, in the unnatural pallor of her skin. You've been working too hard, he said, kneeling beside her. 3 shifts is too much, Nancy. We need the money, she replied simply, as if that ended all discussion. And it did, because what could Michael say? That she should work less when they were 20 days from losing their home, that she should rest when rest was a luxury they couldn't afford. He went to the kitchen and brought her a glass of water. Watched her drink it slowly, her wedding ring sliding loosely on a finger that had grown thinner over these difficult months. The sight of it twisted something in his chest. This woman had stood by him through everything, had believed in him when no one else did, had never once complained about the sacrifices she'd made for his career, for their family, for their life together. And now she was working herself into exhaustion because he couldn't provide, because he'd chosen to save a stranger instead of save them. I'm going to fix this, Michael said, the words coming out before he could stop them. I promise you, Nancy, I'm going to find a way. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. I know you are. You always do. But this time was different. This time there was no solution on the horizon, no prospect waiting to be explored, no hope beyond the desperate kind that comes from having nowhere else to look. Later that night, after Nancy had gone to bed, Michael sat alone in the darkened living room. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from Nancy's parents, one of the few items of real value they still possessed. In the dim light, he could make out the shapes of their life together. The sofa where they'd watched movies with their daughter, the coffee table where they'd played board games on rainy Sundays, the bookshelves filled with volumes collected over decades, all of it about to be lost. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out Grizzly's card. Grizzly's Recovery Fund, it said in that careful handwriting. He ran his thumb over the words, thinking about the man whose life he'd saved, wondering if that man knew that while his heart was healing, Michael's world was collapsing. Why did you stop? The question haunted him, followed him into dreams where he was always running, always late, and always reaching for something that remained just beyond his grasp. Why did you stop? Because his father had taught him that a man is defined by what he does when nobody's looking. Because some choices aren't really choices at all. Because in that moment on that stretch of Highway 41, Michael Freeman had been the man he'd always believed himself to be, not an unemployed architect, not a failing husband, not a statistic in an economy that had no place for him, but simply a human being who couldn't drive past another human being in distress. But as the days slipped away and foreclosure loomed closer, Michael wondered if being that man was a luxury he could no longer afford. The next morning, Michael found himself in the garage, standing before his workbench. It had been months since he'd spent time here, months since he'd felt the comfort of tools in his hands. Architecture might be his profession, but woodworking had always been his passion, a skill inherited from his carpenter father, a connection to something tangible in a world of blueprints and specifications. He ran his fingers over the smooth maple of an unfinished jewelry box he'd started for Nancy's birthday back before the layoff, before their world contracted to the size of a bank balance, before hope became a foreign language. The wood felt solid beneath his touch, real, unlike everything else in his life that seemed to be dissolving into mist. An idea formed, not a solution, not even a plan, just a desperate thought from a desperate man. He could sell his tools, the table saw his father had given him, the hand planes he'd collected over decades, the specialized chisels and gouges that had shaped countless projects. They were worth something. Not enough to save the house, but maybe enough to buy a few more weeks, a few more possibilities. Michael began pulling tools from their places, laying them out on the workbench, each one a memory, each one a story, each one another piece of himself prepared for sacrifice. He was so absorbed in the task that he didn't hear the car pull into the driveway, didn't hear the footsteps on the front porch, didn't hear the doorbell until it had rung twice. Wiping his hands on a rag, Michael made his way through the house. Another rejection delivered in person, another well-meaning neighbor with advice he couldn't use. He opened the door to find a delivery driver holding a large package. Michael Freeman, the driver asked, consulting his clipboard. Yes. Sign here, please. Michael signed, took the package. It was heavy, substantial. The return address was local but unfamiliar, an industrial district on the east side of town. No name, no company logo, just numbers and a street. The driver left. Michael stood in his doorway, holding a box that felt like it weighed more than cardboard and tape should weigh, like it contained something that mattered. For the first time in weeks, Michael Freeman felt something other than despair. He felt curiosity. Michael set the package on the kitchen table and just stared at it. It wasn't large exactly, maybe the size of a briefcase, but it had weight to it. Substance, the kind of package that didn't contain junk mail or Amazon orders. The return address was typed on a plain label, an address somewhere in the industrial district on the east side of town. No name, no company logo, just numbers and a street. His hands hesitated over the tape. 6 weeks of disappointment had taught him to be cautious about hope. Every time he let himself believe things might get better, the world had proven him wrong. So why should this be different? But something about the package felt different, felt important. Michael grabbed a kitchen knife and sliced through the packing tape. The cardboard flaps open. Inside was a leather-bound folder the kind architects used to present proposals to clients back before everything went digital. Rich brown leather brass corners, expensive. The kind of thing Michael himself used to carry to meetings when he was someone. He lifted it out carefully. It was heavier than it looked. His fingers found the clasp and opened it. Inside were papers, documents, and on top a single handwritten letter on plain white paper. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate, like someone had taken great care despite obvious difficulty. Michael recognized the name at the bottom before he even started reading. Robert Grizzly Thompson. His hands trembled as he lifted the letter. Brother, it began, and something in Michael's chest tightened at that single word. You gave me my life. Let us give you yours back. The doctor said I was minutes from death when you found me. Said if you hadn't stopped, hadn't stayed, I wouldn't have made it to the hospital. You threw away everything that mattered to you to keep a stranger alive. That means something to me, to my brothers, to everyone who wears this patch and understands what honor really means. Inside this folder, you'll find architectural plans, business documents, everything you need to start over. We can't give you back the interview you missed, but we can give you something better. Something that's yours. Something nobody can take away. The address is on the lease agreement. Come see what brothers can build when they put their minds to it. Come see what you earned that day on Highway 41. Until then, Robert Grizzly Thompson. The letter continued, but Michael had to stop, had to set it down and press his hands against the table because the room was spinning and nothing made sense and this couldn't be real. Nancy's car pulled into the driveway. He heard her keys in the door, heard her footsteps in the hallway. Then she was there, still in her diner uniform, smelling like coffee and exhaustion. Michael, she saw his face, saw the package. What is it? What's wrong? He couldn't speak, just handed her the letter. Nancy read it in silence. Her hand came up to her mouth, her eyes went wide. Then she looked down at the folder still sitting on the table, and with shaking hands she started pulling out the documents inside. Architectural plans detailed professional blueprints for an office space. Michael recognized the address from the corner of the page, the same address from the return label. Business and corporation documents. Freeman and Associates Architecture, printed across the top. Already filed, already official. A lease agreement, 1 year prepaid. A space in the industrial district, 2,000 square feet. And at the bottom of the folder, a single brass key on a leather keychain. Nancy looked at Michael. Michael looked at Nancy. Neither of them could speak. Is this real? Nancy whispered finally. Michael, is this real? He picked up the key. It was solid, heavy, real. He looked back at the letter, at Grizzly's shaky handwriting, at the words that kept echoing in his mind. Let us give you yours back. There's an address, Michael said, his voice hollow with disbelief. We need to go there. We need to see what this is. Nancy was already nodding, already grabbing her purse, already moving toward the door, like if they didn't go right now, this whole thing might evaporate like a dream. They got in the Honda, the aging Civic that had carried Michael to 1,000 job interviews and 1,000 disappointments. But this time felt different. This time, Michael's hands weren't shaking from fear. They were shaking from something else entirely. The address was 20 minutes across town. Michael drove in silence. The key clutched in Nancy's hand, the leather folder on her lap. Neither of them spoke because what was there to say? How do you put words to something that doesn't make sense? How do you process kindness on a scale you've never experienced? What Michael was about to see would make him question everything he thought he knew about strangers, about kindness, about what it means to have brothers you've never met. But first, he had to get there. The industrial district wasn't pretty. Old warehouses converted into storage units and small manufacturing spaces, chain link fences and cracked asphalt. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find hope. Michael pulled up to the address from the folder. Building 447, a renovated warehouse with fresh paint and new windows. A parking lot that had been recently paved. And there above the main entrance, a sign being installed by two men on a ladder. Michael's heart stopped. The sign read Freeman and Associates Architecture. His name in bold professional letters on a building he'd never seen before. Nancy's hand found his, squeezed tight. "Michael," she breathed. "Oh my God, Michael." He couldn't move, couldn't process what he was seeing. This had to be a mistake, a cruel joke, something that would turn out to be a scam or a misunderstanding. Then the door opened and Grizzly stepped out. Grizzly looked different than Michael remembered. Thinner, older somehow, despite only 6 weeks passing. He walked with a cane, each step deliberate and careful. But his eyes, those fierce blue eyes, were exactly the same. And when he saw Michael standing beside the Honda, frozen in disbelief, Grizzly's face broke into the biggest smile Michael had ever seen. "Brother," Grizzly called out, his voice stronger than it had been on that highway. "Welcome home." Michael's legs barely worked as he got out of the car. Nancy was beside him, her hand gripping his arm like she was afraid he might collapse. Maybe he would. Nothing about this moment felt real. "I don't understand," Michael managed. His voice sounded far away. "What is this?" Grizzly walked toward him slowly, cane tapping against the fresh asphalt. When he reached Michael, he extended his hand. Michael took it, and Grizzly pulled him into a hug. A real one, the kind that said things words couldn't. "This," Grizzly said when he stepped back, "is what happens when you save a brother's life." He gestured toward the building. "Come on, let me show you what we built." The front door was glass, new and gleaming. Grizzly pushed it open and stood aside. Michael walked through Nancy right behind him, both of them stepping into what looked like a different world. The space was enormous. 2,000 square feet of open floor plan with high ceilings and exposed brick walls that had been cleaned and repointed. Natural light poured through massive windows. And everywhere Michael looked, there was equipment. Professional equipment, the kind he'd used his entire career. 3 large drafting tables positioned near the windows. High-end computers with dual monitors at 6 workstations. A conference table that could seat 12. Shelves stocked with architectural supplies. A presentation area with a projector screen. Storage cabinets. A small kitchen area in the back corner. And everywhere people. 15 men in leather vests moving furniture, adjusting computers, hanging pictures on the walls. They all stopped when Michael walked in. Just stopped and looked at him. Then one by one they started to smile. "Brothers," Grizzly's voice rang out across the space. "This is Michael Freeman, the man I told you about." The men started to clap, slowly at first, then building. 15 bikers standing in an architecture office, applauding a 63-year-old man who couldn't speak because his throat was too tight with emotion. Grizzly's hand landed on Michael's shoulder. "Welcome to your new firm, brother." Michael shook his head. I don't. How did you? Let me tell you a story." Grizzly guided him toward the conference table. Nancy followed, tears already streaming down her face. They sat and the brothers gathered around, some leaning against desks, some standing with arms crossed. All of them watching Michael with expressions that mixed pride and satisfaction. Grizzly leaned his cane against the table and began. "3 days after you saved my life, I woke up in a hospital bed. Doctors told me I'd been dead for 47 seconds in the ambulance. Said if I'd been alone out there 5 more minutes, I wouldn't have made it." He paused, his voice getting rougher. "They said someone stayed with me, called 911, kept me calm, kept me alive." He paused, his voice getting rougher. "I asked who. They gave me your name. So I asked around, made some calls, found out about you. Found out you missed a job interview that day. Final interview, last chance kind of thing. Found out you were unemployed. House in foreclosure. Found out you threw away everything that mattered to keep a stranger breathing. Michael couldn't look at him. Couldn't look at any of them. So I made another call, Grizzly continued, to every chapter president in 3 states. I said, brothers, we've got a man who proved what honor means. What are we going to do about it? One of the younger brothers stepped forward. I'm a contractor. So are 6 of my brothers here. We donated the labor renovation, electrical painting, everything. Another man spoke up. I work in commercial real estate. Got the landlord to waive deposits and give us a rate nobody else would get. Equipment came from everywhere, someone else added. Businesses we know, brothers who had extra. Some of it bought, some of it donated. All of it given because of what you did. Grizzly's voice took over again. First year's rent is paid. Every penny. The utilities are set up in your business name. The insurance is handled. The permits are filed. This is a legitimate, fully operational architecture firm, and it's yours. Michael's hands covered his face. His shoulders shook. 40 years of holding everything together, and it all broke apart in that moment. He wept, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere so deep he didn't know it existed. Nancy's arms wrapped around him, and she was crying too. And somewhere in the background, Grizzly was still talking. We've already lined up 3 contracts. Brothers who own businesses need architecture work. Real work, good money. It's enough to get you started, enough to prove yourself. After that, you're on your own, but you won't be alone. You've got family now. Michael lifted his head. His face was wet. His eyes were red, and when he looked at Grizzly, at these 15 men in leather vests standing in an architecture office they built for a stranger, he finally understood. Grizzly's question on the highway wasn't just about curiosity. It was about recognition, about seeing in Michael something that resonated with their own code. You stop because it's right, because someone needs help, because in the moment when everything is on the line, character reveals itself. I don't know what to say, Michael whispered. Don't say anything. Grizzly smiled. Just build things, brother. That's what you do. Build beautiful things. Make this place matter. And when you see someone who needs help, you stop, just like you did for me. Michael stood on shaking legs and looked around the space. His space. Freeman and Associates architecture. Real, solid, possible. But Grizzly wasn't finished. He reached into his vest and pulled out another envelope smaller than the first. He handed it to Michael with a strange expression on his face, something between amusement and satisfaction. Open it later, Grizzly said, when you get home, when everything settles. Michael took the envelope, confused. What is it? Just a little bonus. Grizzly's smile was mysterious now. Something I thought you should see. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of introductions and explanations. Each brother showing Michael something about the space they'd created, explaining the systems they'd set up, the contracts they'd arranged. It was overwhelming. It was impossible. It was real. As the day wound down, the brothers began to leave, each one shaking Michael's hand, each one saying some version of the same thing, you're one of us now. By sunset, only Grizzly remained sitting with Michael and Nancy at the conference table, watching the last light stream through the windows. Why? Michael finally asked the question that had been building all afternoon. Why all of this? The $500 would have been more than generous. Grizzly looked at him for a long moment. You know what I see when I look at you, Michael? I see myself. A man the world decided was too old, too expensive, too something to be valuable anymore. A man with decades of skill and knowledge and nobody who gives a damn. He tapped his cane against the floor once hard. The Hell's Angels aren't what most people think. We're not saints, but we're not monsters either. We're men who found a place when the world said there wasn't one for us. We're men who made a family when blood failed us. We're men who understand that honor and loyalty matter more than what society thinks of you. His blue eyes locked onto Michael's. What you did that day, stopping when everything said keep driving, that's our code. That's what we believe in. So this, he gestured around the office. This isn't charity. This is recognition. This is one brother to another saying, I see you. And for the first time in 11 months, Michael Freeman felt seen. The drive home was quiet, different kind of quiet than the drive there. Not the silence of disbelief, but the silence of too much to process, too much to understand, too much to accept all at once. Nancy held his hand across the center console. "What are you thinking?" she asked finally as they pulled into their driveway. Michael looked at their house, at the place that had been slipping away from them day by day. "I'm thinking that I don't know who I am anymore." Nancy squeezed his hand. "You're the same man you've always been, the man who stops when someone needs help, the man who does the right thing even when it cost him everything. The only difference is now someone saw it. Someone recognized it." Michael nodded slowly. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" For the first time in months, Nancy's smile reached her eyes. "We're going to be more than okay." Inside, Michael remembered the envelope Grizzly had given him. He pulled it from his pocket and sat down at the kitchen table. Nancy brought him a cup of coffee, then sat across from him, watching as he carefully opened it. Inside was a letter on Westbridge Architecture Group letterhead. Michael recognized the logo immediately, the firm he'd been scheduled to interview with 6 weeks ago. The firm that had been his last hope. "Mr. Freeman," the letter began, "I'm writing to offer you a consulting position with Westbridge Architecture Group. This would be a part-time arrangement, allowing you to work remotely on select projects that require the expertise that only comes with decades of experience." Michael skimmed the terms: hours, flexible pay rate, double what the original position would have offered, contract renewable, yearly based on mutual satisfaction. But it was the handwritten note at the bottom that made his coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. "Uncle Robert told me who you are and what you did for him. I've spent 3 weeks trying to track you down. Not many would make the choice you made. Westbridge would be honored to work with a man of your character. Patricia Moreno." Michael looked up at Nancy. "Patricia Moreno, the HR director who called me about the interview. She's Grizzly's niece." Nancy's eyes widened. "You're kidding." "It's all connected," Michael whispered. "All of it." He looked back at the letter, shaking his head. "But I don't think I need this anymore." Nancy reached across the table and took his hand. "No, you don't. But isn't it something how things come full circle, from drowning to solid ground, from isolation to community, from invisibility to being seen, all because of one choice on a highway when everything was on the line." The next morning, Michael called his daughter Melissa in Seattle. They hadn't spoken much in recent months, not because of any rift, but because Michael couldn't bear to worry her with their struggles, couldn't bear to admit to his only child that he was failing. "Dad," her voice was bright through the phone. "What a surprise. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Michael said, and meant it. "Better than fine, actually. I've got quite a story to tell you." He told her everything. The highway, Grizzly, the missed interview, the foreclosure notice, the Hells Angels, the office. "Wait," Melissa interrupted, disbelief in her voice. "Hells Angels, like the motorcycle gang, built you an architecture office, Dad? Are you sure this is legitimate?" Michael laughed. "I had the same reaction. But yes, it's real. I'm looking at the incorporation papers right now. Freeman and Associates Architecture. It's all legal, all above board." "Wow," and there was a pause. "Dad, I wish you'd told me how bad things were. Tim and I could have helped. You have your own family to worry about, your own mortgage." "That's what family does, Dad. We help each other." The words echoed what Grizzly had said, what the Hells Angels had demonstrated: family, connection, showing up when it matters. "I know that now," Michael said softly. "I'm learning." "So what happens next?" Melissa asked. "Are you going to run an architecture firm with a bunch of bikers?" Michael smiled. "Something like that. We've got 3 contracts already, and your mother's going to manage the office. Mom's quitting the diner." "Thank God." The relief in Melissa's voice was palpable. "She's working too hard. You both are." "Not anymore," Michael promised. "Things are going to be different now." When he hung up, Michael felt another piece of himself slide back into place. The piece that had been too ashamed to reach out, too proud to ask for help, too afraid of being seen as weak. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd stopped to help Grizzly because that's who he was, a man who helped others. But he'd been unable to accept help himself. Until now. Until he had no choice but to receive what was freely given. Maybe that was the lesson in all of this. That strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing when to reach out, and when to accept the hand that reaches back. 6 months transformed everything. Freeman and Associates architecture didn't just survive, it thrived. The 3 initial contracts expanded to 7, then 12. Word spread quickly in the local business community that there was a new firm in town led by an architect with 40 years of experience and an unmatched reputation for integrity. What began as a gesture of brotherhood became a successful business built on mutual respect and trust. Michael hired 2 young architects fresh out of school, both drowning in student debt, both unable to find work because every firm wanted experience, but no one was willing to provide the opportunity to gain it. Michael remembered what that felt like, to be dismissed, to be invisible, to have doors closed before you could even knock. So he opened a door. "I don't understand," said Alex, 24, on his first day. "My portfolio isn't that impressive. Why take a chance on me?" "Because someone took a chance on me when I had nothing," Michael replied simply. "That's how this works. You pass it on." Nancy quit the diner in month 4, walked in one morning, gave her notice, and never looked back. Now she was the office manager at Freeman and Associates. She handled the books, scheduled meetings, kept Michael organized, all the things she'd been doing for their marriage for 40 years. Except now she came home at Fidor instead of midnight. Now her feet didn't hurt and her back didn't ache. Now she had time for the garden she'd always wanted to plant. Time for the book club she'd abandoned years ago. Time to be something more than exhausted. "Who would have thought," she said to Michael one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "6 months ago we were losing everything. Now look at us." Michael took her hand. It felt stronger now, steadier. The way it had felt when they were young and the future seemed limitless. "I keep waiting to wake up, for all of this to disappear." "It's not going to disappear," Nancy said. "This is real. This is our life now." Their life. One that had been rebuilt from the ground up by strangers who became family, by a brotherhood that saw value where the world saw obsolescence. "No way in hell." Michael laughed, staring at the motorcycle Wrench had just wheeled toward him in the empty parking lot behind the Riverside Shopping Center. It wasn't a massive cruiser like Grizzly's, but a smaller Harley-Davidson, more manageable for a beginner. "I'm 63 years old, too old to learn this." "Never too old to feel freedom," Grizzly said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I didn't start riding until I was 40. Wrench, the youngest of the brothers, and the club's mechanic, grinned. "It's all about balance, Mr. Freeman." Everything is about balance. Sunday afternoons became Michael's motorcycle lessons. Wrench was an unexpectedly patient teacher, guiding Michael through the basics with a calm assurance that belied his youth. "Easy on the throttle," Wrench would remind him. "Respect the machine, and it'll respect you back." 3 weeks in, Michael was navigating the parking lot with growing confidence. 3 more weeks, and he was riding around the block. By month 3, he joined his first charity ride, a procession of 40 motorcycles raising money for the cardiac care unit at City General Hospital. The moment they presented the $14,000 check to the head nurse, the one who'd cared for Grizzly, was the moment Michael truly understood the power of ripples. One small decision could save a life. One life saved could save many more. Grizzly visited the office every Wednesday without fail. He'd park his motorcycle out front, walk in with his cane he still needed. It probably always would, and spend an hour drinking coffee with Michael, talking about projects and life in the strange, wonderful path that had brought them together. "Third cardiac team meeting tomorrow," Grizzly mentioned one Wednesday in month 5. "They're using the money we raised to install new monitoring equipment. Doctor says it'll give them precious extra minutes with critical patients." Michael nodded. "Minutes matter." "They do," Grizzly agreed, his blue eyes intense. 38 of them mattered to me. They never directly spoke about that day on the highway anymore. Didn't need to. It lived in everything they did together. In the office, in the charity rides, in the brotherhood that had formed between a 63-year-old architect and a 65-year-old biker. The evening Michael opened the second envelope from Grizzly, the one containing Patricia Moreno's consulting offer, he thought he wouldn't need it. And in a strict financial sense, he didn't. Freeman and Associates was doing well enough to keep the house, to pay the bills, to rebuild their savings. But 3 months in, Michael called Patricia back. "I'd like to discuss your offer," he said when she answered. "I was hoping you would," Patricia replied. "Uncle Robert says your new firm is doing well." "It is, but this isn't about money." "I didn't think it was." Michael took the consulting contract, one project a month, specialized work that utilized his decades of experience. But more importantly, it was about rebuilding bridges, about reconnecting with the professional community he'd been part of for 40 years before the world decided he was too old to matter. His first assignment was reviewing plans for a sustainable office complex, the kind of project that had once been his specialty. He worked evenings after the regular business of Freeman and Associates was done for the day. The young architects he'd hired would often stay watching over his shoulder, absorbing decades of wisdom that no school could teach. See how the southern exposure affects energy efficiency. Michael would explain, pointing to calculations that came from experience rather than textbooks. That's something you only learn by making mistakes on real projects. They soaked it up like sponges. And Michael found himself doing something he never expected at 63, becoming a teacher, a mentor, passing on not just architectural knowledge, but the deeper lessons about integrity, about craftsmanship, about doing work that matters. The Brotherhood didn't stop with Michael either. Over those 6 months, they helped 3 other businesses. A struggling restaurant owned by a Vietnam veteran who'd lost his savings to medical bills. A small auto shop that couldn't afford repairs after a fire. A family bakery facing eviction after 40 years in the same location. In each case, the brothers showed up, pulled resources, called in favors, built and rebuilt, and gave second chances the way they'd given Michael one. It's not charity, Grizzly explained when Michael asked about it. It's investment in people who deserve a shot, in businesses that matter to the community, in a world that doesn't throw people away just because they're not shiny and new anymore. The concept resonated deeply with Michael. That's exactly what had happened to him, discarded after 40 years of valuable service because he wasn't the right fit anymore, because he was too old, too expensive, too established in his ways. But the Hells Angels had seen value where others saw liability, had recognized experience as an asset, not a burden, had understood that sometimes the people society pushes aside are exactly the ones who have the most to offer. On a crisp October evening, exactly 6 months after the day on Highway 41, Michael stood in his office after hours. Nancy was locking up. The sun was setting through the big windows, painting everything in shades of gold that reminded him of that fateful Tuesday afternoon. Michael looked at the wall where he'd hung photos, his old corporate badge from the firm that had laid him off, a professional headshot from 20 years ago when he was climbing ladders and winning awards. Next to these new photos, the ribbon cutting at Freeman and Associates, the brothers standing together at the latest charity ride, Grizzly and Michael arms around each other's shoulders, Nancy smiling behind the reception desk, the 2 young architects presenting their first major project. Old life, new life, the bridge between them built by a moment of choice on a highway shoulder. I thought I lost everything that day, Michael said quietly as Nancy came to stand beside him. That Tuesday on Highway 41, I thought I had thrown away my last chance. My career, our house, everything. Nancy's hand found his, and instead you found something worth more than any job. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman who'd stood by him through everything, who'd believed in him when no one else did, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to keep them afloat. The woman who now stood straight and strong, the exhaustion gone from her eyes, replaced by a light he hadn't seen in years. I found out who I am, Michael said, who we are. I found family I didn't know existed. I found purpose that isn't tied to a paycheck or a title or someone else's approval. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You found brothers. Yeah, Michael smiled. I found brothers. The sound of motorcycles rumbled outside. Michael looked out the window. Grizzly was there with 5 other brothers, bikes lined up waiting. You coming? Nancy asked, though she already knew the answer. Michael grabbed his helmet and his vest, the honorary vest with Brotherhood stitched across the back that he wore every time he rode, and headed for the door. But he paused, looked back at the office one more time, at the space that shouldn't exist, at the business that was built on sacrifice and brotherhood, and the simple act of stopping when everything said to keep going. Outside, the October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. The same scent that had mingled with burning oil that day on Highway 41. The day everything changed. Michael walked to his motorcycle, a Harley Sportster, modest compared to the massive cruisers the others rode, but his. A gift from the brothers on the 3-month anniversary of the firm's opening. Grizzly nodded as Michael approached. Ready? Michael swung his leg over the bike, feeling the solid weight of it beneath him. A machine that had once represented everything foreign now felt like home, like freedom, like the second chance he never expected. "Where are we headed?" Michael asked, pulling on his helmet. "Does it matter?" Grizzly grinned. "We're riding. We're together. That's all that counts." Michael started his engine, feeling the rumble vibrate through his entire body. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined this moment. Couldn't have pictured himself at 63, straddling a motorcycle, wearing a leather vest, preparing to ride into the sunset with a group of men society had taught him to fear. But life has a way of rewriting your story when you least expect it, of taking what you thought was an ending and turning it into a beginning. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Michael glanced back one more time at the sign above the door. Freeman and Associates Architecture. His name, his firm, his future. All because he'd stopped when stopping seemed like the worst possible choice. The motorcycles thundered down the street, a brotherhood on wheels. And Michael Freeman, once drowning in desperation, now rode with them, not as an outsider, not as a charity case, but as one of them, a man who'd proven his worth not through success or status, but through the simplest, most profound act of human connection, stopping when someone needed help. 2 years later, on the anniversary of that fateful day, Michael sits in his office at Freeman and Associates. Not behind his desk, but in front of it. Casual. Real. The late afternoon sun streams through those big windows behind him, casting his face in a warm glow. He's wearing his honorary vest over a simple button-down shirt, a visual representation of the dull life he now leads. Respected architect by day, honorary Hell's Angel whenever the Brotherhood calls. His hands rest comfortably in his lap, and when he speaks, his voice carries the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly who he is. People ask if I regret it. Michael says, his eyes reflecting decades of wisdom. Stopping that day, missing the interview, throwing away what everyone said was my last chance. A small smile plays at the corners of his mouth. I tell them the truth. I don't regret stopping. Not for 1 second. What I regret are all the times before that when I drove past someone who needed help. When I told myself it wasn't my problem. When I chose convenience over compassion because it was easier. He leans forward slightly. That day on Highway 41 changed everything. Not because I got something out of it I had no idea what would come, but because for the first time in years, maybe decades, I made a choice based solely on what was right, not what was safe. And in doing that, I found my way back to myself. Movement in the doorway draws his attention. Grizzly appears walking with his cane. The heart attacks have taken their toll, but his spirit remains undiminished. That familiar smile creases his weathered face as he settles into the chair beside Michael. Two men from different worlds brought together by 38 minutes on a highway shoulder. Michael gave me my life, Grizzly says simply. We gave him back his purpose. Fair trade, I think. Michael laughs, genuine and warm. More than fair. Grizzly's expression turns thoughtful. People have been labeling the Hells Angels for decades. They see the patches, the leather, the motorcycles, and they make assumptions. Criminal, dangerous, outlaw. He shrugs. Some of that we earn. I won't pretend otherwise. His blue eyes fierce despite the ears narrow slightly. But what people miss is that beneath every patch is a person. A father, a veteran, a brother. Someone who understands that when the world turns its back on you, you create your own family. You establish your own code, and you live by it no matter what. Don't judge by appearances, Michael adds. I did. I was terrified when those men showed up at my door with their leather vests and tattoos. I made assumptions based on stereotype, not reality. And I was wrong. Grizzly nods. The question isn't whether we make mistakes, we all do. The question is whether we're willing to learn from them. Michael's gaze intensifies. And if you see someone who needs help, stop. I know it's scary. I know you're busy. I know you have your own problems, your own deadlines, your own reasons to keep driving. Stop anyway. Because that moment, that choice matters more than you can possibly understand. The ripples spread farther than you can see. Outside, the sound of motorcycles rumbles to life. The weekly charity ride about to begin. Michael and Grizzly rise in unison, the older man leaning slightly on his cane, the architect reaching for his helmet. This wasn't supposed to be my story. Michael says a final thought before they head out. By all conventional wisdom, I should have kept driving that day. Should have made that interview. Should have gotten that job and climbed that ladder and retired with a nice pension. He smiles the kind of smile that comes from deep contentment. Instead, I found something I didn't even know I was missing. Community, purpose, the courage to be the man I always wanted to be but somehow lost along the way. With that, Grizzly's hand lands on his shoulder. And we were reminded that honor still exists in this world, that sacrifice still matters, that one man's choice can change everything. They walk outside together into the golden evening light. A row of motorcycles waits, engines idling. Brothers in leather vests nod in greeting, mechanics and teachers, contractors and firefighters, men whose lives were transformed by the same brotherhood that saved Michael. Michael swings his leg over his Harley, feeling that familiar surge of freedom. Nancy waves from the doorway of the office, her face relaxed and happy. The young architects peer out the windows, witnessing the duality of their mentor's life. As the motorcycles pull away from Freeman and Associates riding into the sunset, Michael Freeman feels the weight of the vest on his shoulders. Not a burden, but a reminder of connection, of purpose, of the unexpected ways life finds to save us when we're brave enough to save others. The road stretches out before them just as it did on that Tuesday afternoon 2 years ago. But this time, Michael isn't alone. This time he rides with brothers. This time he understands that the most important journeys in life rarely follow the paths we plan. Sometimes the best thing that never happened to you is exactly what you needed all along.